Hello. So today we have our third conversation in the RACC Movable Studio on the art of translation. Today I am talking to a wonderful poet who does translations, as Peter Daniels prefers to refer to himself, and the author of beautiful translation of many Russian poets, and especially Khodasevich. Peter will talk more about his work on Khodasevich, because this book, I think it's a must for everyone who wants to read Russian literature of that era, specifically Khodasevich. It's just an exquisite translation. So Peter Daniels, welcome.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to be able to do it in such a flexible mode. You're in London, I'm in a quite undisclosed location in Massachusetts, and we're able to do that. So I will start by asking, how did it all start?
How did it all
How
start?
did you begin to translate Russian literature in particular?
Well, I studied some Russian at school. We had a teacher who had learned Russian in the Air Force, obviously for, I don't know, spying or landing in Russia or something. And so I got what was then called an O-level, which is, you know, kind of basic grammar. And at that time, I also went to Russia on a coach tour with about 50 other teenagers from Birmingham, where I lived, and we went across Europe to Moscow and came back again. So, you know, I'd sort of got a taste of Russia, and I did a bit more studying after I got the O-level at school, but I didn't take it that far. And then I forgot it all, and then started reviving it a few years later. And at that time, in the early 80s, my then partner was very much involved in finding a bride for a gay Russian in Leningrad who needed to get out. And so I went to visit him as well, and you know, just kind of got back into the whole idea of Russia. And I did an A-level, which is a sort of university entrance kind of level. So that meant I'd got the grammar, you know. I took it at a fairly young age, and then I forgot it all again. And quite a long time later, in the mid-2000s, really, I got a job in 2003 after I'd done an MA in poetry, and it was a very busy job and in publications, and I just gave up poetry. I just thought, okay, that's it. I'm not going to do any of that now. But I couldn't stop myself wanting to do something, and I went to these translation workshops run at the Poetry School by Graham Fawcett, who is, he's really a kind of French and Italian linguist, but he's certainly got some other languages, and he's interested in other languages. So he would give us a poem by somebody and explain all the background, the cultural background to whoever it was. You know, there was everybody really, Dante and who else? I can't remember. Everyone. No, that's not true. Not everyone. And he would show us the poem in the original, and then it was a bit like a kind of exam, and you turn over the page, and then there'd be not a version, but there'd be the poem with all the vocabulary next to it. So you would just kind of get on and have a go during the session, and produce something at the end of the session, which that was just so stimulating. Graham was bold enough to have a go at things like Chinese and Japanese and Czech, and I think we did a Polish poet. I think was that Szymborska? I can't remember. He sort of felt too nervous about Russian for some reason, but he knew that I had at least some kind of Russian, and he put my name forward for a Hawthornden fellowship. Hawthornden is a castle near Edinburgh in Scotland, and I'm sorry, I've got a doorbell. I'm going to have to break off. And the Hawthornden people were actually wanting a group of translators to be together, not to work together, but just to have sort of translation in the air kind of thing. So I had 4 weeks there in December in Scotland, so there wasn't very much daylight and it was quite cold, and you just sort of huddled up and got on with it. And I'd taken with me this book by Michael Wachtel, who teaches at Princeton. And it was a really lucky find, this book. I just got it from browsing in a bookshop. And in this book, he's talking about meter as something that matters in Russian poetry, not just as something that keeps the poem going, but that it has a real meaning. And he uses, I mean, everything goes back to Pushkin, of course, but he uses several examples from Ходасевich. And there was one in particular, Daktili, which just knocked me out. It was just so moving, and I wanted to work on it. And I'd taken several anthologies of Russian poetry and with me, and I found all the Ходасевich I could, and I went to the Scottish Poetry Library in Edinburgh, and also to the National Library of Scotland, which had some useful things. And fortunately I found that just at the beginning of the 4 weeks. So I had 4 weeks just working on Ходасевich completely unexpectedly. And I managed to get quite a few sort of reasonable starts on things. I mean, well, I'd finished going through the poems, but the ones I worked on particularly, of course, were the blank verse poems, because you didn't have to worry about rhyming. But the fact that he wrote these blank verse poems is very interesting. That he, just at this time, just after the revolution, he just somehow wanted to do something that was something that Pushkin had done. And one of the poems is very much kind of modeled on a Pushkin poem, but it's as if he wanted to find some other way of doing things. So not that he carried on doing very much of that afterwards, but he did, I think it's 7 blank verse poems. But also there was another one that I really enjoyed translating, called The Stars, and that's set in this cabaret in Paris. This is when he was in exile. And the whole atmosphere of it is so much like the kind of thing that Eliot does in those quatrain poems. What's the one? Sweeney Erect is one of them, and others that have this rather sort of louche atmosphere about them. And the poem isn't quite in that sort of quatrains, but I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to model it on Eliot as what this poem needs to be an English poem. So, that was something that I did while I was at Hawthornden. And, I just built up a real momentum, and I couldn't stop myself. And I just wanted to get on and do more Ходасевich. And I got some advice from one Russian who I met, but I haven't really kept in touch with. But I wanted to find someone that I could really work with regularly, and Robert Chandler introduced me to Maria Karp. And that was just a wonderful relationship that I would get working on a poem, just, you know, doing all the vocabulary, getting some kind of basic version done. She would show me all the idioms I didn't catch and the Russian cultural references, and you know, that she would set me on the right track, and then I would keep working on it as an English poem and show it to her again. So, you know, that was a really wonderful relationship, and she's so good at just helping me find what the poem needed. But of course, it was my job to actually give it what it needed. But that was such fun. And quite early on, actually, I think before I'd started working with Masha, I sent what I'd been doing at Hawthornden to PN Review, Michael Schmidt's magazine, and he was very impressed and published what I'd sent him. So that was very encouraging. Obviously, once I'd got a reasonable number of poems, I wanted to find someone who would publish a book of them. Michael Schmidt, I think maybe he felt he just couldn't sell Ходасевich. I'm not quite sure why it was he didn't want to do it, but then the next publisher to go for was Anthony Wood's Angel Classics. And Anthony is someone I've met quite a few times locally because he lives only about a mile away from where I am. And, you know, he publishes often neglected classic works in translation. That's what his publishing is about. He got as a reader Alexandra Smith, who teaches at Edinburgh, and she produced a list of the Ходасевich poems that really ought to be in the book. So that was a good sort of program, you know.
We have a lot of mutual acquaintances and colleagues and crossroads, and of course Hawthornden.
Oh yeah.
I remember how you were telling me how cold it is in Hawthornden. So when it was my turn to go there, June actually, it was wonderful. So I got lucky, but I always remembered your words about the blankets and I do remember that you started Ходасевich. And of course, Anthony Wood. It's interesting that Anthony Wood is not only is he an excellent superb translator, but also his name is certainly associated with Pushkin in the first place. And Nabokov, for example, in his famous speech about article, rather, obituary, in memory of Ходасевich, wrote about this lineage of Pushkin, Tyutchev, Ходасевich, direct descendant of that school, if you will. And yes, Sasha Smith and Masha, who's a wonderful scholar herself in Edinburgh, and Maria Karp, who is my friend too, who's a translator, is a wonderful translator herself. She has a wonderful sensitive ear, and she's a translator, Virginia Woolf, and of course writes Orwell's biography just came out. So you had wonderful collaborators.
Yeah. Yes, very lucky with that.
That certainly helped. We'll return to Ходасевich, of course, today. I'd like to talk about something very different. Things happen sometimes, like you just by accident, you found this book, right, that you got to carry all the way to Hawthornden. Sometimes we get a letter and it changes everything. So you told me this fascinating story about Chekhov and about this acquaintance of yours, the theater director whose and I read all those this exchange that you sent me. His view of Treplev's play, we're talking about Seagull, so he was going to stage it, but his view of Treplev and the whole persona and of course the play within the play as not something ridiculous, not something ludicrous that would normally be perceived as something almost like a joke, which has this point of view has its reasons, because we know Chekhov's attitude to symbolism and ideas versus simple perception, and his take on that. That said, it's a very interesting take. And that theater director wanted it to be a poem, to be conveyed as literature within literature. It had to be a poem, and he asked a poet to write this monologue. Can you tell us this little story?
Yes, well, it's something that it feels kind of incidental to my real work, you know, and it happened in 2011 while I was right in the middle of working on Ходасевich, and it's like one of those things that happen when you're really busy and something else comes along and you just kind of deal with it and you don't even really notice that you've been doing it. So that time was a very productive time for me, and it was actually a neighbor of mine, Mimi Kalvati, who's a fantastic poet. I mean, she is really top drawer poet. And it was Joe was he was a fellow student of hers from drama school, and so she'd known him a long time, and he contacted her because he wanted a poet to do this, and she just said, no, I can't do that, but Peter has Russian, and you know, give it to him. So I did it, and I can't quite, you know, looking back at it, I haven't looked at it again for a long time, and it feels really quite cheeky to do something like that, but I can see absolutely why he wanted it like that. So
can you read it?
Yes. Okay.
Just the part, and of course, everyone Russian knows the opening lines, so
yeah.
You know what it is.
Okay. All the human beings, all creation, lions, eagles, geese, stags with antlers, spiders that crawl, the fish silently swimming by, the starfish floating, the wriggling eel, and creatures invisible to the eye, gone long ago. The entire wheel of life slowed down until the time for the cycle to cease. No living things upon the earth. For centuries of centuries, the moon has lit her lamp in vain. On the meadow, not one crane to screech awake. No evening beetles buzzing round the linden trees. Nothing but cold, 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 the emptiness and the horror. The bodies of living things are lost, eternal substance changed to dust, to rocks, water, or clouds, and now their spirits gather in one whole, the world spirit, and appear in me. I hold inside my soul Alexander, Caesar, Shakespeare, Napoleon, down to the least of the animals, the worm, the leech. Philosopher and instinctive beast blend in me. The life of each and every creature I recall, for every life I live again inside myself. I feel it all. So that's the kind of sort of semi-rhyming thing that I've found myself doing, you know.
Sound work is superb. It's just amazing, and it makes it so much more real, and it's just a whole new view of Seagull and and Trepliev, and actually all the dynamics now in the famous play. The voice. So you said something about Eliot, that as you were translating one of the at least pieces of Khodasevich, you sort of modeled it in a way, acoustically or tonally, or in some other way. Model it by, you heard Eliot, in your head. So that is one of the paradigms. That's one of the approaches that we actually, if you happen to see the first dialogue we had, we discussed it with Dmitry Manin about this whole approach of finding an analog in, or was it with Mary Jane? Actually, with both, finding an analog in the target language, in the target literature, and build something, cast something in a way similar, which is not the only approach, not the only paradigm, but this is an approach, this is a way, and it's interesting. However, how important are other things for you? And something that is very important to me is the voice. Of course, it doesn't have to be the one and only goal to reproduce the voice. You can completely redraw that poem in a very different way and make it different age, and forget about the voice. But one of the approaches and one of the paradigms is trying to relay the voice of the original. I'd like us to go to your Akhmatova. And the title is That Voice, and of course it sounds like a little bit too coincidental, but I think that in this particular poem, and especially because we're moving toward this another project of yours, World War I project in which you are participating, and I believe this is one of the poems that is included, right? At least it's adjacent to it. So I'm going to, since some of our readers, unlike Chekhov's Seagull, some of our readers may not remember this particular poem. It's not as famous as, say, Prayer, that you also translated. I'd like to read the Russian too. So how would we go? You start English and I do the Russian? Yeah, let's do that, because they're
okay. It's up to you.
Listeners here.
Okay. That voice. That voice has argued with emphatic quiet, gaining its victory against the peace. Inside me still remains the final winter before the war, like singing or like grief. Whiter than the Smolny Cathedral's arches, more secret than the luscious summer park is how it was. We'd no idea how quickly, in deepest sadness, we'd be looking back.
So yes, and iambic pentameters are already carrying something important about the voice, right? Normally when we translate it. And but here, I think that you achieved a whole lot of very interesting things. Let me read the original. Тот голос с тишиной великой споря победу одержал над тишиной. Во мне еще как песня или горе, последняя зима перед войной. Белее сводов Смольного собора, таинственней, чем пышный летний сад, она была. Не знали мы, что скоро в тоске предельной поглядим назад. I noticed a lot of very interesting details that you did here. For example, the very important word of the poem Nazad, which I emphasized for a reason. you also, looking back is your final word. You interestingly changed certain things. In another poem of Akhmatova's, you did, and Таинственный is one of her, it's kind of one of her trademarks. Таинственный, if we count the word таинственный in her poetry, it would be a lot, right? But we would need to, I'll need to resend you the Zoom link again. Soon will be cut off by Zoom. But you chose to translate it as secret. It's interesting. So this is my first question. Also, in the first stanza, she has «Во мне еще как песня и как горе, последняя зима перед войной». This line, «Последняя зима перед войной», the final winter before the war, is it's kind of a coda within a poem, right? It's very important. That's the last line in the stanza. You switched two lines, and it's also interesting. You started «Песни как горе», the song and the grief. You ended with it. «Inside me still remains the final winter before the war». That's a wonderful enjambment that just underscores that's final winter, like singing or like grief. Is there any reason for that, or it just happened because you were dealing with a lot of things in this?
Oh gosh, can I even remember? I think it is definitely because this is one where I did try to maintain some kind of rhyme. When I'm rhyming a quatrain, usually I will try to do lines 2 and 4 rather than lines 1 and 3 as well, because it depends. Sometimes maybe a rhyme will come to do the whole thing, but it's that's the kind of easy way out, if there is an easy way out.
So this is wonderful. So what I'm saying is that you achieved this by sound, by tone, by some miracle translate, because there is something which I would refer to as translator's miracle. It just happens. You don't know how.
Yeah.
And because when we read Akhmatova, even if you're a mouse, you sound like Akhmat. I mean, there is something in the tone, right?
Yeah.
And it's there. Okay, so we are continuing our conversation with Peter Daniels. I'd like to ask you, Peter, in connection with this poem that we just heard, Akhmatova's poem, and in general, do you deem relaying the voice as one of the main goals of yours or not?
Yes. Yes, I think I see the poem as so much something that a particular voice has produced that there's no way of translating it satisfactorily without that. And that has a lot to do with whether you find the poet congenial to translate, though I think there are other reasons as well. But Khodasevich is somehow, although we're very different people, I can really feel I'm on his wavelength in a way that's I don't know, I mean, Tsvetaeva or someone like that, I would feel completely miles away from,
And we feel that. We feel it. Sometimes it's just, it's amazing. Sometimes we feel like as if you were almost channeling his voice. And this is even knowing that there is no one Khodasevich. There's so many. There's one persona. Even we compare his early ones with his masterpieces in European Night, but it's a very different voice. But still there is one persona, and yet we see, just because of us readers, we see Khodasevich slightly different. Even within our lifetime, we change our perspective on him changes normally. I think he's one of those who's kind of a little bit oscillating. He's never something stable. Like, you have this poet, you love his work, and that's it. This is it's like you staple it to a wall, right? No, he's always oscillating. And even having said that, when I read your translations of Khodasevich, I wonder how you did it, because how is it possible to, it's like you're almost, I don't know, him, his brother, his reincarnation.
Yes, there are certain things of his. There's this recurring thing that happens where he's looking at something ordinary in the street or something, and he's connecting it with the universe, the stars, you know, just something completely. And
it's always unexpected. Yes,
yeah,
it's always all these sudden revelations, little explosions.
Yeah. That's something I feel very close to somehow. That I don't know. I just feel you always need to have that kind of sense of the universe shifting and not being quite trustworthy. You know?
In this case, you have something in you as a person, as a mind, something that is at least responding. It's not similar. We are never similar, but responding to something. And wavelength is of course a very it's kind of it's a very common expression, but it's very relevant here. Yeah. I'd like us to I asked you to prepare the text of Everything is Stony, which I think it's one of his best, of course, poems. And I'll read the Russian. Let me read the Russian first,
so
that we can hear what you did with the sound and with this eerie Berlin draft. Все каменное, в каменный пролет уходит ночь. В подъездах у ворот, как изваяния, слипшиеся пары. И тяжкий вздох, и тяжкий дух сигары. Бренчит о камень ключ, гремит засов. Ходи по камню до 5 часов. Жди, резкий ветер дунет в окарино по скважинам громоздкого Берлина. И грубый день взойдет из-за домов над мачехой российских городов. So this is, of course, 1923 Berlin, and this gap. How did you chinks? This gap, this tunnel, skvazhina. It's of course much more than just gap between buildings. It's almost a tube, a pipe, a tunnel that connects realms, universes, dimensions. So can we hear your?
Yeah, it's a poem that I didn't get into the book because I just hadn't finished it. You know, it was just too difficult, but I finally managed it. Everything is stony. On the stone stairs, night moves along. At gateways and at doors, couples like statues joined as if they're stuck. And heavy sighs, cigars with heavy smoke. Keys clinked on stone, the bolt clanged in the lock. You've had to walk the stones till 5 o'clock. Wait, piercingly, an ocarina moan is blown through chinks in lumpy Berlin stone. Behind the houses, ugly morning breaks. The stepmother of Russian cities wakes.
It's absolutely beautiful. It's stunning. This line, keys clinked on stone, the bolt changed in the lock. It's just magic. And it's interesting that you've changed something in the movement. He had Hadi, Jdi. You had to walk the stones till 5 o'clock. So you kind of you made a pause here. You created a pause here so that we can gain breath at all and carry it to the end. So that was definitely a choice. You could easily do walk, wait, just like just to parallel the
I think the rhythm has a lot to do with that choice. But also, I suppose
you could have said you've got to walk.
Yeah.
But you said you've had to walk, which is a different story, right?
Yeah, maybe that would have been a better choice.
Really? No, I didn't. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to correct, but yes.
No, well, I'm always fiddling with things. I'm a great reviser of poems that thought they were finished, you know.
But yeah, I in my head it would be you've got to do you do wait to do it. You've got to do it. But the way I love the way you have it already. And so Khodasevich is so. Yes, you're sort of he's a kindred soul, kindred voice to you, but he's so complex. I think that it's very difficult to translate him in part because his magic is so unexplainable. You don't, like the Soviet authors, the Soviet poets, the whole schools of them try to mimic that, but they were bland. They were not Khodaseviches. They were not those super sensitive egos Khodasevich was. Human beings. So they try to mimic the tone and the pace, the kind of relaxed diction, and it never worked. It was all bland and interesting and Soviet, right? Everything is so unpredictable. You don't know how he gets away with things. He says something like, "Я подумал, жизнь моя." Who would get away with that? You know what I'm talking about, right? This poem, "Ты показала мне," one of my favorite poems, actually. "Ты показала мне без слов, как вышло хорошо и чисто, тобою проведенный шов по краю белого батиста. И я подумал, жизнь моя, как нить под боржьими перстами, по легкой глади бытия, бежит такими вот стежками. То виден, то сокрыт стежок, то в жизнь, то в смерть перебегая. И, улыбаясь, твой платок перевернул я, дорогая." This дорогая is like a little corner of a handkerchief that is slightly folded.
Yeah,
it's amazing. But who would get away with this absolutely ridiculous line? "И я подумал, жизнь моя." And in his poem, it's amazing. So just like everything else in this poem, actually, it's one of the poems that I loved when I was just starting reading poetry. But then I returned to Khodasevich after, you know who? After for the first time when I read The Gift by Nabokov. Remember, Koncheev has a lot of Khodasevich in him, and the imaginary conversation of the protagonist, Godunov, Cherdentsov, and Koncheev is pretty much a lot of it is about Khodasevich and Nabokov, but there's a lot of Khodasevich in this very intriguing character. So this was what drawn to me in my youth back to Khodasevich, and I discovered a lot of other things. Война, the war. you have the Mousy verse, right?
Yeah.
Let's try. We don't have that much time left, but let's read that just because we cannot part with Khodasevich that easily. Just the English.
Yeah. Is war for people, but under the floor it won't reach us with its bloody noise. Our sphere is one of endless devotion. Our world is one of quiet freedom, thoughts of grace and of neatness. The remotest field mouse and I are brothers forever, strangers to war. But may the Lord watch over you, severe and snowbound country. On the day of great battle for Russia, I raise this inaudible verse to heaven. Maybe mousy prayers will be more to the Lord's liking than others. France, amid your natural beauty, a sword swishes and slashes your vines. Beloved cradle of liberty, he is no mouse who does not love thee. Day and night, Belgium, you've toiled beneath the clang of mechanical steel like a mouse, and they've ripped you apart, sweet damsel, those cats with their Swabian whiskers. Ah, you're at war, the flinging of gunpowder, merciless gas that's carrying death, while down in secret underground burrows, there's bitter trembling, devout rustling, and a candle lit for you.
I would just read the last 5 lines just to see what happened here. Ach, у вас война. And this is, of course, 1914. Yes, September 1914. Ах, у вас война. Взметает порох, яростный и смертоносный газ. А в подпольных, потаенных норах горький трепет, богомольный шорох и свеча, зажженная за вас. Yeah, that's some Mousy verse, right? So this is amazing. So how do you do that? How do you translate this magic that is unexplainable, something I just said a couple of minutes ago, and this, how does it happen, if you know? Because maybe you don't.
I don't know. I mean, one thing in this poem, I wasn't attempting rhyme, really. I suppose I was always attempting a kind of harmonious sound, you know, but
this is word, this is dissonance, so it's very fitting.
Yeah,
having no rhymes. Everything is chaotic rather than harmonious. Other world words. So this is part of the project that you are participating in.
Yes, Olga Tabachnikova, who teaches at the University of Central Lancashire, has had this project going for some years. I think it is now actually accepted for publication. I'm not quite sure what the schedule is, but she wanted to get a kind of parallel of the Russian and English language poets from the First World War, which is a slightly strange project to me because the war meant such different things, and of course with the revolution everything just moved to a whole other level in Russia. But you know, as a contrast, that's an interesting thing in itself. So there are a number of us who've been working on this, I mean, including Boris Tralyuk and all kinds of people. It was just, you know, one of those things where you're kind of given a bunch of poems to translate, and you just have a go at it.
Yeah, the array is very impressive. Balmont and Bloch and Bunin and and Khodasevich, of course, and Akhmatova.
Yeah, yeah.
And everybody, even
I think Olga managed to find or to suggest poems that seem to work for the various people, or at least in my case. I suppose actually if I didn't get on with a poem, I just said, I'm not going to do this one, I'm sorry. And there we are. And then it was good to have a reason to do some more Ходасевich, because having done the book, apart from a few poems that I was still working on or just still liked that I hadn't done yet, the whole project, you know, it felt like having a line under it, having the book out, and I was glad to be able to get back to some kind of reason for doing it. So that's why.
It's great. It's very fortunate that you are continuing with Khodasevich. In terms of the living poets, we know that translating someone, a living poet, is a very different and a very intriguing, or very rewarding experience, because you get to collaborate with the poet. And I know that you translated, actually, Anatoly Movshevich is one of our Cardinal Points journal authors. He, in the last issue, he had a short story, in actually second to last issue, the old railway carriage, a short story translated by Nicholas Pasternak Slater. But he also is a poet, and you are translating some of his poems, I know.
Yeah.
And he's translating yours, right?
Yes, that's right. And as a kind of intermediary, his daughter, who lives in London, she contacted me after the Ходасевich book came out, because she was thinking she wanted to find someone to translate her father's poems. So she's been sort of working between us a bit to kind of help with negotiating.
You're collaborating by emails, or you get to hear the sound?
I think it's mostly been by email, though, you know, I meet Tanya to go over things sometimes in person. Yeah.
So this is wonderful, and probably that's not the only living poet you're working with, but maybe maybe.
Well, I'd like to get to know more. I don't feel very much connected with present-day Russian poetry, and I really should be. I need to get to know more Russian poets and work with them.
I don't think there are any shoots in our workshop. I mean, shop. Who else? If I just before we part, which is sad, to part, because it's I really love what you're doing. Who would be the someone, just a name that springs to mind, someone who you would love to translate but you never have so far? One name. Russian.
Yeah.
Any era.
Any era. Well, I have had a go at some Pushkin, but he's very daunting. And of course, you know, plenty of people do have a go at Pushkin. It was so good to discover Ходасевich, who was so neglected. And also, the very year that I discovered him, he was just coming out of copyright. So that was absolutely perfect.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
Anyone from his circle?
I'm sorry?
Anyone from his circle? Not that he had a circle, but
no. Yes, his circle is very interesting, because he had to kind of escape from Brusov, who was such a bad influence, and
we're lucky he had.
I'm sorry?
We're lucky that he did. and he was kind of nearsighted in so many ways, and it seems like he's alone in so many ways, and everybody else, even the ones that are closest to him in craft, art, like I love the story when he confused Yesenin and Tsvetaeva, like literally confused one for another, because in his mind they were somewhat similar, which is, I think, is very poignant. And you know, he had this dream. Tsvetaeva was still alive, and Yesenin was already dead. He saw them both in his dream hanging. It was obviously Khodasevich died 2 years before Tsvetaeva, and he didn't know. But so he had this way of perceiving even people closest to him in art in a very poignant, insightful, and yet some kind of a blurry, right? Nearsighted way. So let's, you know, we'll be lucky if you continue just with Khodasevich, and whoever appears later, maybe, you know, it will be just a very fortunate coincidence, just like that book was that you picked in the store, and we'll get lucky again with more of your translations. So thank you so much, Peter. It was a joy, and it was a joy talking to you. I remember our reading together in London. Do you remember?
Yes, of course.
It was a wonderful, memorable reading somewhere in a club or somewhere. I remember you on stage, and it was wonderful to read with you, and an honor. And it is an honor to talk to you. Good luck.
It's an honor to be talked to, or talked with, or whatever the verb is. Yes. Yes, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Bye.